Now, my title is a bit ambitious. I wanted to compare and contrast different dominant frameworks or approaches to history teaching. But for want of time, I will focus only on Hindu nationalism's historical project. I'll first discuss the cardinal features of their narrative, and that's very easily told. It has just two fundamental premises. Pride in a great Hindu past, that is what history is all about, and stigmatization of Indian Muslims as foreign tyrants. So these two are the two main content of history teaching, history writing, and so on. The politics of Hindutva is driven by these two imperatives. Am I being audible? Can you hear me? Okay. Multiple organizations have long propagated such accounts of Indian pasts with great energy and with considerable success. RSS, of course, being our Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, being the most influential. RSS now controls and shapes the new educational dispensation, especially the research institutions, syllabi, and curricula that relate to history. More importantly, more than any others, they have long shaped the broad popular understandings of Indian history in the public domain. So we may say that at the present moment, they control the Indian past in every sense of the word. I will, as I said, talk about the cardinal features of their history writing. In the second part, I'll talk about how they disseminate, how they circulate their histories. And that part is going to be, I'm very afraid, very controversial and unpalatable for all of us. And I'm actually unnerved by my own findings. We all know that Hindu nationalism offers a highly simplistic, highly repetitive storyline, and its arguments, the facts that it presents as quote-unquote facts, can be disproved by the most elementary historical research. We also know that the best historians of this country have shared a broadly secular, progressive outlook. You know, our Ramila Thapar, our Irfan Habib, and many, many others, they can be counted among the best historians anywhere in the world. Now, the question, therefore, is why, in that case, has this narrative, this simplistic narrative, become so much more widespread, popular, and credible for a wide swathe of Hindus than serious historical scholarship? It seems we have the best historians on our side, but that is not making a dent in popular historical imagination. We have to explore the strategies then through which Hindu nationalism disseminates its messages, its teachings about the past. And I'm afraid those reveal formidable political skill and intelligence on their part. This is not what I think you came here to listen to, but we have to understand the sources of their strength, and we also have to understand our own relative limitations as secular historians. We did not fail in the writing of good history. All the good history are written from these quarters. But we failed somewhere to take our message to the larger society. So the RSS has 38 mass fronts, which include the BJP and the VHP. Just one of them is dedicated to one specific knowledge form, and that is history. That is how important the subject is to them. Constructions and interpretations of past events are indeed the foundation and the lifeblood for their politics, its justification, its motivating power. V.D. Savarkar composed the core dogma, which RSS shakhas have been circulating since 1925. Their schools began to teach it from the early 1950s, while plans for installing it at formal educational and research institutes were systematically put together in 1973. We have, therefore, an enduring pedagogical tradition which is now nearly a century old. Methodically told and retold, its lessons have sunk deep into a vast stretch of popular common sense. It is no surprise to any of us that RSS histories represent Muslims as demons. But it is chilling to realize how far back such demonization goes. Sheldon Pollock and Cynthia Talbot have shown how, after the first Muslim dynasties established themselves in different parts of India from the 13th and 14th centuries, defeated Hindu kings often framed their accounts of the wars in a particular way, either as the epic battle between Ram and Ravan, between good and evil, or as the advent of the dreaded Kali Yuga, the last and most degraded epoch in the Hindu four-age cycle of time. The advent of Muslim rule, these kings said in their inscriptions, presaged that dark age. Now, admittedly, these were the creation of a military and a Brahmanical elite, and they may not necessarily have had much purchase on popular imagination. It's also interesting that these 13th, 14th century Hindu kings referred to their enemies as Turkic, Pathan, Mughals, etc., not as Muslims per se. So the ethnic identities were even then more relevant than their religious affiliation. But certain religious frames of reference had been assembled, and what was essentially a political narrative of wars and defeat had been filtered through, understood in terms of sacred mythological figures and events. That technique of framing would prove very useful to Hindutva centuries later. Now, something else also enables the wide acceptance of their tales. History is in many ways strangely different from most other academic subjects. Unlike physics, economics, sociology, politics, what have you, history is frequently and most easily appropriated and retold by non-historians with astonishing confidence. They imbibe their opinions from multiple sources, from historical fiction and films, from TV serials and children's comics, from family memories, from lectures by tourist guides at historical sites. And I would advise you to go to Rajasthan and listen to some of the tourist guides lecturing on, Rajput heroism, Mughal villainy, etc. Stories about the past which do not require authentication or verification, but stories which are all around us, stories which insist on claiming a superior status to academic histories. And Hindutva ideologues have worked on exactly these realms with great energy and thoroughness, inserting their quote-unquote facts and interpretations into popular narratives, drawing out political lessons for the present from them. These are also realms that secular historians have by and large left alone, for lack of comparable resources and influence certainly, but also for lack of interest in this arena. Let me be a bit personal. I grew up reading stories about quote-unquote terrible Muslim conquerors who savagely crushed heroic Hindu resistance in late medieval times. These came from Bangla historical fiction for children and for adults, written by literary giants, and I mean that very seriously, in late 19th, early 20th century. People like Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, Ramesh Chandra Datta, Abanindranath Tagore, Abanindranath, not Rabindranath, Sharadindu Chattopadhyay, and others. Totally misleading histories, which nonetheless made a deep impact on me because they were so beautifully, so powerfully written and told. So, I grew up identifying Hindu kings as Indian patriots who apparently strove to free the country from quote-unquote foreign rule, whereas actually they were fighting for their own realms, for their own power. I did not realize then that all empires are despotic by definition, be they Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, or British. They require conquest, wars, bloodshed, oppression, and those did not simply characterize Muslim empires. Above all, I could not possibly have known that the foreign designation routinely inflicted on Muslim dynasties is bizarre. From the moment a Muslim invader founded a kingdom in India, the dynasty invariably settled down here, and no Muslim ruler ever possessed any other homeland outside this country. Nor did they send money, soldiers, laborers, prophets from their empire outside of India. Nor did they exclude non-Muslims from the highest posts in the civil and military bureaucracies. By no stretch of imagination, therefore, were they foreign. Our school and college textbooks too followed a particular pattern, and I suspect that pattern lives on in most university schools and colleges still. Ancient India was described as the time when a great Hindu civilization flourished, sustaining memorable achievements in art, literature, philosophy, science, religious texts, devotional movements. Fair enough. But strangely, when we crossed over to the so-called medieval or Muslim period, civilizational elements seemed to disappear overnight. All we had were accounts of invasions and conquests, temple wrecking, forced conversions. So, what the RSS and its many fronts teach as history falls on an already prepared ground, on fertile soil. Of course, from the 1960s and 70s, an enormous spate of serious, responsible, great histories did enter textbooks, college, and university syllabi, at least in the best institutions in metropolitan cities. But, and it's a very big but, they have remained confined exactly to those locations, to advanced students in the best schools, colleges, and universities, to a minuscule minority of even educated Indians, and their numbers are few, let alone reach the popular realm. The best Hindutva historical narrative, the basic Hindutva historical narrative is best told in the words of V.D. Sarkar. His major achievement was to make Hindu and Indian, these two words, appear as synonyms, as equivalents, to merge faith with geographical origin and merge both with Indian nationhood. He did say that the Aryans were foreign invaders who conquered indigenous people. But he also said that their Hindu faith nonetheless was born inside the country. So Hindus alone are the authentic Indians, and their culture constitutes the national essence of India. Who are Hindus? Undeniable caste inequalities did problematize his vision of an organic and seamless Hindu folk. But he resolved it with the motive of shared blood and land. Despite endogamy, he says, the blood of all castes have actually mingled over centuries through miscegenation, thereby making Hindus one family, one people. At one stroke, then, caste inequality is invoked, but it is also left behind in a quite brilliant parallel move. You admit it, but you overcome it. What about non-Hindu Indians? And this is what he says, I quote, "We Hindus are bound together not only by the tie of the love that we bear to a common fatherland and the common blood that courses through our veins, but also by the common heritage we pay to our Hindu culture. In the case of the Mohammedans or Christians, though Hindustan to them is fatherland, yet it is not their holy land. And if their faith, end of quote, and if their faith is born outside the holy land, they can't be. Indians in the true sense. The territorial origin of one's faith becomes the real test, and it's a strange test because by that logic, no Western national can be a Christian, nor a non-Arabic national be a Muslim anywhere in the world, because Islam and Christianity were not born in the West nor in countries outside the Arabic ones. Savarkar, how did India become the land of Hindus? Now, Savarkar has an interesting answer. He says Aryans founded, I quote, new colonies through conquest. The prince of Ayodhya, Ram, brought the whole land under one sovereign sway, end of quote. His Hindu nation then is founded on imperial conquests, on colonization of indigenous people, exactly what he accuses Muslims of doing. Though there had been foreign invasions in the pre-Muslim past, the real danger for him came from Muslims. And I quote again, these new Muslim enemies not only aspired to crush the Hindu political power, but they also had a fierce religious ambition, many times more diabolic than their political one. That was to destroy the Hindu religion, which was the lifeblood of the nation. Now, this flies in the face of all historical evidence that Muslims didn't come here to conquer for their own power, their own empire, but they came with a religious mission, and one wonders how India remained a Hindu majority country in that case. The worst and the most persistent sin of the Muslim is, you can all guess, is rape of Hindu women. And I quote again, it was a religious duty of every Muslim to kidnap and force into their own religion non-Muslim women. This incited their sensuality and lust for carnage. Muslims considered it their highly religious duty to carry away forcibly the women of the enemy side as if they were commonplace property, to ravish them, to pollute them, to distribute them to all and sundry, and to absorb them completely in their fold, which increased their number. Once again, not a shred of historical evidence for what he's saying. He even blamed Shivaji for not abducting Muslim queens. Shivaji's chivalry, he says, actually took away the only deterrent the Hindu queens might have had against Muslim depredation. So he sort of imagines the Hindu queens crying out to Shivaji to save them by raping Muslim women. So, how these words resonate. Abducted Hindu women enhance Muslim population in two ways. They are forcibly converted to Islam and they bear Muslim children. Our own times have added a fresh spin. Muslims apparently breed prodigiously because they alone are allowed for wives. Now this flies in the face of the most basic arithmetic that even I, an ignoramus, can understand. The logic really defies basic arithmetic because no matter whether a man impregnates 4 different women or just one, a woman bears only one child at a time, and the number of wives makes no difference to the size of the population. Since then, of course, rape tales have circulated decade after decade, fattening themselves on different temporal contexts. Epic medieval and partition times mingle effortlessly with recent allegations of love jihads. Though Hindu and Muslim men abducted Hindu and Muslim women in perfect numerical symmetry during partition times, the numbers were exactly the same. Hindu rapes are neatly deleted from historical and from personal memory, and rape becomes a defining feature of Muslim men alone. So I'm sorry I have to talk about these extremely unpleasant things, but the recent much acclaimed biography of Savarkar by Vikram Sampath doesn't come into this area, doesn't touch upon these aspects of his writing, so I thought I should remind you of them. What do his words do? It is important to look at the skill with which he crafted them. They are highly charged, they throb with overpowering emotion, and I wish I could cite more from them. Sheer passion thus overrides the absence of evidence, of research. Rhetoric acquires the status of historical truth, myths circulate as history. In the process, and it is heartbreaking, they wipe out a complex history of multifaceted inter-community intimacies and conflicts, of wars as well as alliances among Hindu and Muslim kings, of shared culture, language, work, and everyday realities of ordinary people that cut across religious divisions. That richly colored fabric of Indian lives, woven from so many threads of lived experiences, is reduced to a single plot, implacable mutual hostility. I do not want to say there was no conflict in the past, or that conflicts, sometimes Muslim despots didn't bear the responsibility for such conflicts. It's no use saying that despots will be despots, whether they are modern or medieval. But please note that but there was also the shared culture, the shared lived experiences. Please note that somewhere along the line, we have insidiously slipped from the supposed villainy of Muslim kings to the evil that every Muslim, from warrior to beggar, apparently embodies. The Muslim becomes an open, floating signifier on whose body any kind of terrible histories can be freely inscribed. I think there's an English series called Horrible Histories, a comic series, and the Muslims, Indian Muslims are the bearers of horrible histories in our times, in our place. At the same time, the Muslim is also a closed category, representing nothing but so-called fanaticism and oppression. The living Muslim stands in for the historical, the pseudo-historical, the imagined, and the mythological. Sometimes as Babur, who initiated Mughal rule, sometimes as Jinnah and his cohort, who put forward the partition plan, sometimes as Ravan, whom Ram killed. A universe of magical realism where all epochs are horizontally laid out, and one can fast forward and backtrack at will. The next step in the narrative is the most interesting one. Having conjured up the eternally vile Muslim, having invented him, Hindutva then commands the good, peaceful Hindus to refashion themselves precisely in the image of the imagined enemy, as infinitely fanatical and cruel, so as to verse the Muslim at his own game in the present. So from RSS ideologues to Sanjeev Sanyal, everyone would say peace is for the best. But, you have to be strong, you have to be sure you can vanquish your enemies, you have to prove your strength to have peace. So first war, then peace. The first step invents an image of the other, then the self remakes itself in that image, point by exact point. If they have raped, we will rape. So a Rashtra Sevika Samiti woman once told me, and I quote her, since they have raped so many of our women, we must now rape them back. So in the same sentence, she changes her gender. They raped our women, and we must rape them. She becomes a man in the same sentence. However, just as Hindu-Muslim anti-colonial unity became a real possibility in the early 1920s, the representation of Hindus as a single organic substance began to crumble. For this was the peak period of Dalit protests, especially in western and southern India. This was the time of Ambedkar, this was the time of Periyar. How to manage Hindu unity, how to even pretend that there is Hindu unity under such circumstances. And here Savarkar makes a very important statement, and I quote, "Nothing makes the self conscious of itself so much as a conflict with non-self. Nothing can weld people into a nation and nations into a state as the presence of a common foe. Hatred separates as well as unites. Nothing can weld people into a nation and nations into a state as the presence of a common foe. So, caste-divided Hindus they must have an external enemy figure to achieve any semblance of unity among themselves. There can be no Hindu nation without the imagined Muslim enemy. It is the enemy, moreover, who creates the nation, who is the foundation of the nation. The anti-national predates the national. Without the anti-national, in Savarkar's ideology, there's no nation. M.S. Golwalkar went beyond mythology and history and added a contemporary inspirational model of his times, and we are all familiar with it, but let me just cite a couple of lines. In 1938, he wrote, and I quote, "To keep up the purity of the nation and its culture, Germany shocked the world by her purging the country of the Semitic races. A good lesson for us in Hindustan to learn and profit by." And what is this lesson? I quote him again. "They, that is the non-Hindus, may stay in the country wholly subordinated to the Hindu nation, claiming nothing, deserving no privileges, not even citizens' rights." So this is 1938, before Jinnah had even dreamt up the partition plan, before the Indian Holocaust had even occurred. Between 1938 and 2018, for 80 long years, no some representative ever retracted this profusely reprinted statement. The Nazi policies that he refers to are the Nazi Citizenship Act of 1935 and the regulations prohibiting Jewish German sexual and marital relationships. Mohan Bhagwat finally said in 2018 that the passage would be deleted from the new editions of Golwalkar's works because it is no longer relevant, and the press went wild saying now the RSS has softened, has become gentle, peace-loving, etc. The question still remains, doesn't it? Was it relevant in 1938 to say these things? That the Germans have proudly purged their nation of Jews. And now I tremblingly come to my contentious part, the sources of RSS strength. RSS runs a large number of its own schools as well, and there are also many more affiliated schools, colleges, and universities which go by different names, not the Saraswati Shishu Mandirs and Vidya Mandirs and so on, but other names. You know, it's very difficult to even scratch the surface of their work because they function under so many different names. But their historical lessons are not confined to educational institutions alone. A simpler version is preached by the VHP at their shakhas, men's and women's. It is taught at RSS trade unions, the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, at women's organizations, at tribal welfare institutions. Golwalkar trained homebound mothers and wives on how to stay at home but still to transmit these lessons among neighborhood Dalits. You know, he had a very detailed plan for this. RSS history teachers are legion. The Sangh trains countless affiliates and sub-affiliates on a daily basis, we know, and these affiliates and sub-affiliates teach many more in their turn. They seep into the minute pores of Indian society. They form cells within religion, charity, culture, education, leisure, among women, students, Adivasis, Dalits, urban and rural workers, army personnel, and lawyers, and many others. Wherever they work, they teach history, and this is something no other political formation organization does. They attain thereby a creeping hegemony. It is certainly facilitated by electoral victories, but it is not created by victories alone. No matter whether they are in or out of power, at state or at national levels, they get on with this work day in and day out. Nor does it owe its success entirely to, or even substantially, to NRI and corporate support. Many times I have been asked, but they get these funds and the funds create what they can do. These may be important inputs, but the real spine of their historical enterprise is made up of their full-time workers. In their mobilization and assiduous training of a gigantic and very dedicated cadre base, the RSS combined has displayed something like organizational genius. It is a cadre which is superbly trained in proselytizing methods. They are ready to work far from home for years for very little salary and to live much of their lives in great discomfort. Other parties have had comparable cadre bases in size, in personnel, but they never imparted this thorough training, this relentless ideological education. The proclaimed RSS mission is, quote-unquote, man-making, which precedes nation-making. Thus educated, the cadres then train with equal thoroughness the social segments they work with. Every single serious field study on the RSS demonstrate the extent of their work. And these field studies do not come from their propaganda machinery. They come from good, solid ethnographers, anthropologists, political scientists, and historians. I do not find anything remotely comparable among their political adversaries. The Congress let go of its Gandhian rural ashrams soon after independence. The left parties did have solid mass bases and multiple fronts, which at one time were even larger than the RSS outfits. But they did not develop such a highly trained permanent cadre base equipped with powerful ideological and pedagogical mission. Nor did they try to develop educational institutions outside the states where they held power. Even in the states where they did hold power, they did not develop their own educational alternatives. They relied on the standard government schools and the standard syllabi. Their mass fronts, like the trade unions, certainly helped the working classes with their survival problems, but they made negligible or no efforts to systematically educate them, to inculcate social, cultural, and historical knowledge and values beyond rudimentary formulae about class war. And I can give you multiple examples. I've talked to their trade union fronts and their women's fronts and so on. And when I say left, I include myself among them, and this is self-criticism. And I must also admit that when I talk about left parties, left governments, I am not talking about Kerala. Kerala is very serious about education. They have attended to public education, at least I hope so. West Bengal, where the left front held power continuously for 32 years, something the RSS, the BJP has never been able to achieve. 32 continuous years. Public education was in shambles. They never used the secular NCERT textbooks, which are of superb pedagogic quality. Their own textbooks were dull reading, unimaginative, often grossly incorrect about facts, and I've seen them. Sometimes they also repeated communal stereotypes. They just didn't take these books seriously, to look at them, to see, to send them to reputed historians to see what was amiss. This is quite inexplicable because in West Bengal, till 2006-07, they had the solid support of the cream of the Bengali intelligentsia behind them. But they did not use them as resource persons to develop an alternative vision of pedagogy, education, an alternative version of history which would be solid, sound, and yet persuasive. In contrast, the first RSS primary school, Saraswati Shishu Mandir, came up in 1952, just after the ban on the RSS after Gandhiji's killing was removed. The first thing they did was to found a school, a primary school. Middle and secondary level schools were added later. The RSS has been running the largest school chain next to government schools from a time when they were nowhere near political and electoral power, and when they were far weaker in national importance as compared to other opposition parties, most notably on the left. For instance, I'll just give you an instance. So far, the BJP has never ruled West Bengal. But in 1990, there were 21 RSS schools in West Bengal, at a time when the left front looked absolutely invincible. At Nakshalbari in North Bengal, where tea gardens have shut down for a long time and there are no affordable schools for the poor, they set up a primary school in 1999. I have a water. Thank you.
I opened it.
Thank you. Thanks so much. They set up a primary school in 1999 in 2 rented rooms. It was taught by pracharaks earning rupees 500 a month and vistaraks earning rupees 250 a month. Now grown into a formidable secondary level school, it sends out its student among unemployed tea garden workers to distribute charity as well as to spread quote-unquote moral education. And we know what that means. There is also abbreviated schooling for remote areas where Ekal Vidyalayas meet once a week with one teacher to offer basic literacy. Vanvasi Kalyan Ashrams provide rudimentary learning to Adivasi children, and so do Seva Bharati schools in slums. Hundreds of Sanskar Kendras disseminate, once again, quote-unquote, moral education in remote, inaccessible areas. Whatever forms in which they teach, they all teach history. Contrast this with schools in Delhi which have a secular nationalist or even leftist orientation. Bluebells, Sardar Patel, Springdales, and so on. These are excellent schools. We all send our children there. But they cater to the middle classes alone. There are also other excellent progressive private schools, Sanskriti and so on. But even the upper middle classes would find them prohibitively expensive. Of course, there are many hard-working, idealistic grassroots institutions which are run by NGOs or by clusters of individuals who try to educate subaltern children with creative pedagogic experiments. Many of you here would be part of that, I think. I can also think of the Eklavya group in Madhya Pradesh or Anhad here. I know of some, and CSSS of course, I know of some which are doing superb and imaginative work among slum children in Kolkata and in small towns in West Bengal. But starved of funds, support, or political assistance from non-BJP parties, many sink or become confined to narrow segments, unable to expand. And I have had personal experience of non-BJP secular parties opposing educational efforts, in these subaltern areas. How do RSS outfits incorporate subaltern social segments? How much time do I have? 10 minutes or so, 10 minutes? Akhil Bharatiya Itihas Sankalan Yojana, ABISY, is the RSS-run history research center. It collects oral myths at Kulu in Himachal Pradesh from Adivasis, then locates similar ones in Brahmanical myths and claims mutual affinity and common origin and pulls them into the caste Hindu folds. In her field work among Kulu Adivasi groups, Daniela Berti saw how ABISY appropriates local beliefs and folds them into their old legends. According to traditional Adivasi beliefs in the area, gods or spirits tell their lives to a low caste or tribal, illiterate medium who, however, is divinely inspired. The medium then recites these words which he does not understand himself to the king. The king subsequently interprets them to his subjects. The present king, Devender Singh, is now a staunch RSS man. He transcribes the spirit messages as told to him by the medium and then hands them over to ABISY. ABISY explains their meaning to the local people, and we'd all understand how they'd go. President of Kulu's ABISY is a lawyer who incorporates quote-unquote local intellectuals, school teachers, astrologers, priests, sadhus, as historians who interprets lives of local gods. He then annexes them to the Brahmanical cosmogony. And this is a notable feature of RSS work, to mobilize organic intellectuals, local men in charge of producing and teaching knowledge of many sorts. We may rightly say that this is not really knowledge, this is a travesty of knowledge, but this is what passes off as knowledge in these areas. And nobody else has gone to these areas to tell them otherwise, to work among them. ABISY also does manage to muster impressive self-sacrifice from its workers. RSS Pracharak Ram Singh Thakur gave up a pre-partition professorial faculty position at Lahore University to dedicate himself full-time to ABISY. He lived thereafter, says Daniela Berti, in a single room at the Keshav Kunj RSS hostel and travelled untiringly, despite his old age, to supervise the RSS Itihas Darpan journal publications. And to do what? To preach, I quote, national consciousness of India's glorious past, unquote, and, quote again, to expose the damage caused by Muslim and Christian invaders, unquote. The endeavor is the same everywhere, but it takes on different forms in different places. In Nagaland, as John Thomas shows, RSS outfits have worked closely from the 1960s. Who thought of the RSS in the 1960s? With the Ramakrishna Mission. Who would associate this highly prestigious institute with RSS? Together they organize Hindu festivals and conferences along with constructive employment generating programs for women and children. Pralay Kamingo tells us at Arunachal Pradesh, affordable Shakti Peeths or RSS schools have led attacks against local churches from 1977. Under the RSS affiliated Vivekananda Kendra, which was set up in 1972. By 2010, Arunachal had 30 RSS schools with 400 teachers and more than 10,000 students. All follow the residential Gurukul model with non-stop monitoring of students, with non-stop classes on Gita, yoga, and significantly on quote-unquote topical issues. Again, we know what that means. But they also provide informal schooling for preschool children, health centers, yoga training centers, hostels, vocational training for women, water management, rural housing, agricultural renewable methods, and the VK Medical Research Foundation in Assam has been offering online medical help for a long time. In 1993, it established the Vivekananda Institute of Culture at Guwahati to make it, quote-unquote, the regional intellectual fountainhead. The institute developed a strong academic profile with seminars, lectures, research projects, helping local people to explore their own traditions while simultaneously absorbing them within the Hindutva project. A Hindutva sense of the cultural past with its toxic mix of ethnic pride and ethnic hatred pervades all such projects. but it is so deftly woven into a strong fabric of much needed charity that it often proves irresistible. And that brings us to a crucial aspect of Hindutva's pedagogic package. To mobilize, to influence deeply marginalized people, you need to give them something they need, something they do not have, something that is more than good secular words, be it said by Nehru or by Gandhi. Nehru and Gandhi were undoubtedly very great men, but their words no longer cut any ice among these people. They need something else. So, to sum up, it is true that the content of Hindutva histories is thin to the point of being non-existent. But the modes of dissemination are innovative, diverse, multifarious, serious, and thoughtful. There's no denying that. And here lies the crux of the matter. It is prepared by a vernacular elite which guides local knowledge producers. It is not the work of trained historians. It is dangerously easy to ridicule it as naive and plainly wrong, devoid of minimum academic standards. It's all true. They have no academic credentials whatsoever. But it is propagated through innumerable grassroots institutions beyond the formal academic sphere, and now the formal academic sphere, at least so far as history is concerned, is increasingly coming into RSS hands. It is taught by thousands of cadres who have worked tirelessly and selflessly for decades. The ABVP, for instance, ran courses and lectures and group meetings on nationalism in JNU for a very long time, unnoticed by everybody. Its strength and reach are therefore unparalleled. It's the sheer quantity, continuity, and intensity of RSS historical work that makes all the difference. Neither any alternative political formation nor academic ones ever achieved nor even tried to acquire that range and depth of dissemination. It's the medium of instruction that accounts for their success, not the message, which is truly meager, and not to say hate-filled, wrong, fake history. Now, I know these are not words that we want to hear now, and good friends actually told me not to present the second part of my talk today. But if I can't talk about these things here, where else can I talk about them? Where else can I share my terror, my, sleepless nights as a history teacher, as a historian? And if we do not discuss something which has been a part of our past and present for nearly a century, aren't we also doctoring history? Aren't we also distorting history? Thank you.